Hello, everyone. I am Scott Kaplan. I am the Director of Play Development at Manhattan Theater Club, and I am just so thrilled and grateful to be joined today by the wonderful creative team behind CLASSIX. CLASSIX is a company that was created to expand the classical canon through an exploration of dramatic works by Black writers. They define these classic works as plays by authors of African descent from around the world that speak profoundly to the times in which they're written and resonate deeply with our own. CLASSIX engages artists, historians, students, professors, producers, and audiences to launch these plays into the public imagination and spark productions worldwide. With us today from CLASSIX, we have Brittany Bradford, AJ Muhammad, Dominique Rider, Arminda Thomas, and Awoye Timpo. Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is just a pleasure to be in community with you all today. So I thought we could start out just, I thought we could start by just doing like a little bit of contextualizing, because I know this is a big part of the work you do through CLASSIX. So Awoye, perhaps you could start us off by talking a little bit about, you know, the overall mission and vision of CLASSIX and how it first came into being.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so good to see you, Scott. Thanks for, it's always fun to gather with the rest of the team. So we're really excited to be here. Yeah, no, CLASSIX has been such a great and beautiful adventure. And in a way, it kind of started off as kind of a trip down a rabbit hole. I was working on a production of Shuffle Along as assistant director to George Wolfe, who recommended that I read a couple plays, and the search to go find those plays and learn more about those writers kind of just led me down continued rabbit holes of exploration and just kind of the kind of grandeur and brilliance and beauty of the Black theater canon. So in 2017, it started out as a reading series exploring 4 plays by different writers. And then this extraordinary team came together, and we've just been kind of building and letting it grow from there. But, you know, it really comes out of, for me as a director, looking for work and wanting to understand Black theater history and Black theater scholarship more, because there's such a, you know, there's a world in which, as I think so many of us have come up, and we study August Wilson, the greatness and grandeur of August Wilson, and we study Lorraine Hansberry, but we don't actually really usually study Alice Childress or Bill Gunn or Kathleen Collins. And so CLASSIX is really about kind of shining the light on the fullness and the complexity of the Black classical canon.
I love that. And, you know, you talked about yourself as a director, and sort of jumping off that, I'm curious to hear from all of you about how you first got started with CLASSIX and how it relates to your own individual pursuits as artists or dramaturgs or educators. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. I first met Awoye when I was in grad school at Juilliard, and I was collaborating with the Black actors at NYU. We had all gotten together and formed a theater collective called Home Base, which was all about showcasing the Black students at both schools and trying to give them an opportunity to perform in Black work while they were in school. And a friend of mine at NYU was like, you should definitely get in touch with Awoye. I think you both have similar minds and similar creative wants. And we met, and I agree. And here we are now.
I'll follow. I'm Arminda, and which you'll see in the screen. I'm so used to doing podcasts that I don't think that people are going to see me now. But I trained as a dramaturg, and I am a dramaturg. But there was a time early in my career where I accidentally fell into. I had the great luck of falling into being the archivist for Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, and so I spent a decade or 2 in their basement. And in their basement, I discovered I pretty much got my education in theater, specifically in Black theater, but, you know, in theater. And just, at that point, I had a bachelor's degree in theater. I had a master's degree in dramaturgy and theater, and I knew nothing. And and so just it was kind of the Awoye revelation that I had done all of the studying and done all this preparation, and then I just had all this time to read plays or to read playbills, to go through all of the playbills that they had accumulated over decades and realize how much theater there was that I didn't know existed. I couldn't find records of, and I just it became this hunger to know more and to know more. And I met Awoye when we were working on a project together in California on an adaptation of Toni Morrison's Jazz by Nambi Kelly. And I was in the middle of an Alice Childress crush fest and announced this kind of to her. And that was the right thing to say to her. And the next thing I knew, we were all meeting, and it's been great.
I'll go next. I first heard about CLASSIX. I was sitting in Jack Philip Moore's office in the public, and I was talking and sort of rambling about a frustration I was feeling as a director of like a lack of other Black directors to like talk to and look up to. And also, I think simultaneously, a lack of my own knowledge of like older Black plays to talk about. And Jack was like, oh, I can kill two birds with one stone. Do you know Awoye? And it sort of just so happened that I think Awoye and I met for the first time earlier that year up in Long Wharf, because she was there doing Paradise Blue and I was assisting on a show there. And so I sent her an email and was like, is this a thing that exists? And she was like, yeah, come through. And so it was like, it was really easy and really fun. And like being able to talk to Awoye was great. And I think for me as a director, it's always nice to be able to just be like, hey, I know you want me to do this Shakespeare play, but what about Double Mine? Or like, what about Wedding Band? Or like, what about these other plays that exist that I think need more examination than they've gotten? And like, how do we talk about this? Because like, if you're programming Fairview, you should also maybe be programming Trouble in Mind, so we get like a lineage conversation going, right? And so it feels super important and helpful to be able to have that sort of connectivity as an artist, to be able to point to Childress to understand Sitters Drury, to be able to point to Kennedy to understand Susan Laurie Parks.
I think
I was just yeah. I mean, I can't recall the first time I met Awoye, but I know that Awoye's name has preceded her as this incredible young woman director who's directing, you know, shows in the U.S. and also internationally. And in addition to being a dramaturg, I also work with a company called the Fire This Time Festival, which is a theater. It's a theater organization that produces the work of early career and underrepresented playwrights from the African diaspora. And right when I was starting to join the Fire This Time Festival team, Awoye directed. She directed a short play that was in one of the 10-minute play festivals. And then many years later, I got a job working at the Schomburg Center. And when Awoye was I'm a librarian at the Schomburg Center in the Research and Reference Division. And when Awoye was starting to do research for, as a part of the info gathering work that she did that laid the groundwork for CLASSIX, I would see Awoye at the Schomburg Center trying to find these plays by Bill Gunn and other playwrights. So I think shortly after that, we had crossed paths again, and Awoye had invited me to just, you know, be a part of the team of dramaturgs who worked on the reading series that Awoye spoke about in 2017. And of course, like, you can't say no to Awoye, so all you have to do is just say yes, lead the way, and as the Ava DuVernay film says, I will follow. We're all following Awoye to the promised land of, you know, uncovering this incredible canon of plays by playwrights from the African diaspora.
And Scott, I'll just say, I was telling someone the other day, like getting this team together, it's like, I actually think of it kind of like when you watch a great kind of heist movie, you know what I mean? I feel like people going around to like different parts of the country and different parts of the globe and being like, oh my gosh, who are just like the greatest minds and great artists, and what does it mean to put that group of people together? So it's really just been like divine intervention in so many ways, but we just have such a phenomenal and extraordinary and brilliant team. And it's what's fun about it too is that like we each get to bring our dreams of and our hopes about what we would like this canon to be, how we would like people to have access to this canon, the kinds of shows we want to see. And it's like the collective dream of these 5 people ends up being what CLASSIX is.
I love that. And I just want to affirm what everyone said, that yes, whatever Awoye, I have learned also when Awoye says something, you follow, because it will lead you to great places. And, you know, so all of you were talking about the canon, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about, you know, there's this sort of theatrical canon that has always been traditionally known as, and, you know, it's something that we all grew up with. And, you know, I was thinking back at this moment of like my education with the theatrical canon and how I was sort of, who were the Black playwrights that I was familiar with through that education. And of course, it was August Wilson and Lorraine Hansberry, who are incredible writers, but that was about it. And I was thinking about, you know, just a bit more about how our education system and obviously the theater industry creates and reinforces this idea that we have of the theatrical canon. And I'm curious if all of you or any number of you can talk a little bit more about how you sort of see your work either reimagining or expanding or frankly dismantling, you know, our understanding of what that canon is and what it can look like.
I think in an educational standpoint, right, there's that quote that changing a curriculum is like moving a graveyard, right? It's really hard, and there's a lot of opposition to that happening, and you see it left and right within drama programs as well. And I will only speak as an actor who's been through that program, but when something gets canonized, I think it gets repeated a lot of the time throughout the years of your education. You know, if you're learning about Shakespeare, it's not a one-off experience. You're going to be taking a class on it, and then you're probably going to be doing it in a show, and you're going to be doing that probably every single year of your education. And then anytime you meet another playwright that maybe was influenced by that playwright, you're going to be talking about Shakespeare again when you're doing Tennessee Williams or when you're doing O'Neill. And there's this sense of lineage that you feel and the sense of importance that gets put on those canonized works. And normally then what happens is when there is a playwright or an artist who is a woman or of color, that gets sidelined more in education. And it feels as a student like it's an add-on or it's an addendum, and it's something that's meant to fill the gaps. And you can kind of feel that there isn't the same amount of reverence to those artists, and that there isn't the same recognition of lineage, even though I would argue that Albee was probably influenced by, you know, Black playwrights that came before him just as much as Shakespeare, but you don't get to hear about that. So in a way, it feels like there's a falsity to what is actually happening and the traditions that are a part of American theater. So it is a problem, and I think that the way that you do that is really analyzing, or how do you fix it, is analyzing the curriculum that is in place and recognizing that there are more voices that have to be at the forefront and more voices that have to be valued, and how you talk about them has an influence on the trajectory of a student's experience and feelings about those artists.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in and piggyback off of what Brittany said there. It's one of those things where it's like, it's wildly unfortunate that a theatrical canon isn't just like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where like, if you want more women or people of color in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's like, oh, who are these people listening to? Who do they care about? How do we make like the committee more diverse? How do we like figure out this problem that's happening with the committee, right? Because with like even the idea of a canon, it's so much of a cultural thought. It's so much of like, and that's the problem with theater sometimes, is like, of course there are institutions, but there are also like people who are not inside of institutions who are making shots that you can't see, which I think in some ways makes it even scarier. And it's one of those things where, like, to me, I think for me as an artist, like, I'm obsessed with Greek theater. And this thing I'm always trying to do is actually just, I am more than anything else, I'm hijacking them. Like I'm taking what they were doing and being like, actually, these things apply to Black people. I am going to tell you about that. You don't have to enjoy it. It's fine if you don't, but this is what I'm doing. And I feel similarly about like even the idea of a canon. What's it good for, actually? Like what's the use of a canon? Because it oftentimes feels to me like when we talk about particularly the American canon, right? Like it's already a violent thing because it's American. And then you get into this other issue where it's like, actually then like, how do we include Alice Childress? How do we include, right, these great playwrights? And the problem to me with the idea of a canon becomes that like, no matter how many people are inside, there's going to be outsides, right? There are going to be people who are left by the wayside. And so I wonder a lot if there is a way to think about, an organizational platform that is able to bring these people in so that you can know who they are, but there is no sort of like, these are the only people, right? Which is what I feel like the work of canons do. It makes people onlys and specials, except for that like Miller, Williams, like these are the three greatest playwrights of their time. How do you know that? And why is that? And who wasn't being allowed to be in those rooms, in those spaces, whose plays were being left in drawers, right? And so it feels like maybe we need to move past even the idea of a canon. Like we should add an X to it somewhere, just like CLASSIX did, right? To really just like, this is something else. Like we're trying to create something else. I think an archive is maybe more useful than a canon.
It's so interesting you say that, because then it makes me think of the fact that there is a dismantling that you would hope that can take place, and that the people who are doing the dismantling within the educational system will have the faith to recognize that what's on the other side will be better. You know, I think sometimes it's like we don't even want to dismantle the idea of canonizing works because somehow something's going to be left off, or we're not going to do it right, or we're going to make mistakes. And it's like, maybe you will make mistakes, but I bet if we keep on analyzing it and if we keep on holding ourselves accountable, what will actually come out on the other side will be revolutionary. But we've got to push ourselves to get there.
Right. And then you also have like scenarios where you won't have to have like, when you're in that theater history class, because Brittany, you and I aren't that far removed from like college, you won't have the situation where it's like you and I are the only two Black people in a theater history class and someone's talking about August Wilson and it's like, do you want to teach this course today? Like, is this what you want to do? Like you won't have to have that sort of like awkward encounter ever again. You'll be able to learn.
It's also, I know we probably have to move on, but it's also, it's so interesting to me that a lot of the time, the way it gets spoken of in educational settings is that this is going to be beneficial to the students of color, and that's why we're doing it. I would argue that it's actually beneficial to everybody, particularly the white students, who have to recognize that this is also a part of their history. By acting like it's not, you're also sidelining them in their education. It's for all of us. It's not just for a Black student to be able to see another Black playwright. That helps. But I think it's for all of us to recognize that these are all of our traditions of American theater that have gotten us to where we are. And
that just makes me think of the sort of narrative pillar of what you all are doing in terms of the understanding a lineage and understanding the context of these works. And I would just love to hear any or all of you talk a little bit about, you know, how you go about doing that work through CLASSIX and why sort of understanding that history or geography or aesthetic of these plays is just so important to understanding sort of, you know, this work in general and its significance.
I'll actually connect that to the amazing things that Brittany and Dominique were saying too, because there's something, I think so much of our kind of work and our investigation is about kind of a reframing, but that reframing is actually by shattering the frame. And so it's also, you know, I talk a lot about this nature of kind of like the illusions of where we think we are in our theatrical landscape. There's the illusion that is created of kind of the off-Broadway, regional, and Broadway landscape that becomes a sense like people then we get forced to kind of live inside of this illusion that that's what theater is, that trajectory and that history, that's what theater is. And part of our work is about shattering that illusion entirely and being like, we are in Wonderland. Like, we are actually in wonderland of the kinds of work that people have been creating in terms of what performance traditions are around the world, not just for Black work, but for work around the world. There is a landscape that is so broad and so vast and so continuous and so beautiful, and it's really us kind of shining our light inside of this landscape of a wonderland. And the narrative component of CLASSIX is really about how do we tell the stories about the beautiful things that we're finding inside of the rabbit hole, this kind of endless, glorious rabbit hole that we find ourselves in. And not be in any way limited, because that limit is, and in addition to the ways that it's been exclusionary, it's also an illusion of what actually is, who we actually are, where we actually live.
I'm getting a lot of nods. Awoye put it perfectly. Well, you all have mentioned a few writers. I heard Bill Gunn and Alice Childress and Adrian Kennedy and so many writers I know you all want to showcase. And I feel a little bit bad asking for your recommendations, as I'm sure many have asked you this question, but it feels, yes, people should do this research on their own and go to the CLASSIX website and really educate themselves. But I'm curious, who are some of your favorites that everyone just needs to know about?
Well, we haven't really had the chance to talk about this playwright a lot in CLASSIX, but there's a playwright named Oyamo. He was born as Charles Gordon, and he changed his name to Oyamo. And in the 1970s, Manhattan Theater Club produced one of Oyamo's plays, and I think that was the only play that MTC produced of his. And I would love to see MTC go back into his incredible body of work. He's been writing for over 50 years, and he's a brilliant playwright and a brilliant voice. And so that's someone that I think that his name should be back in circulation. And through the work that I do at the Schomburg Center, I stumbled across a play that he wrote called Fried Chicken, and I forget the title of it, but it was a one-act play. And Angela Bassett she was in the premiere of the play in the mid-'80s, as well as the late actor whose name I'm forgetting. But so this is somebody that should definitely be. It's called Fried Chicken and Invincibility, and so I think that's he's someone I would definitely say to that I would recommend people research his body of work, because he has a lot of his work has been published and some of it is unpublished. But
I'm just always gonna say Childress. If and I know Arminda's probably gonna say the same thing, but it's just like you should be reading her full lengths. You should be reading her one acts. Like, go to the Schomburg and read her libretto. Like, read the plays that didn't get published. There's like a treasure trove of just as much as she is a playwright, I also think she's also an amazing theorist. And there's just so much good stuff that she's doing. I would also say Aisha Rahman, who similarly is working with is trying to cultivate a jazz theatrical aesthetic. Yeah, those are probably my top two.
I also know that we've already spoken about Bill Gunn, but I just love him so much. And as someone who loves film as well, I think he's just as influential in that medium as theater. And I think, honestly, more than just a certain playwright, I'm really interested in creative enclaves, which is what we explore also with CLASSIX. But I want there to be just more information out in the world and for people to know more about the African Grove Theater. Or even today, before we were with you all, we were talking about the Marshall Hotel and its influence in the intellectual and creative Black enclave of New York. And I want all of those artists that were involved in that to be able to be appreciated.
Yeah, I would hop onto that. In addition to Alice Childress, because I don't think her name has been mentioned enough. Has anybody said Alice Childress today? Okay, so anyway. In addition, I'm really fascinated by the playwrights of the Harlem Renaissance, because so many of them were women writing largely one acts, but Georgia Douglas Johnson and Eulalie Spence, Marita Bonner, Mae Miller. I think that, and some of those plays really still land right now. Like I directed a few Eulalie Spence plays in June. God, what month are we in now? Somewhere in the middle of this pandemic. And I started working on it before and then let it go thinking, well, that's done. And then got to do the deep dive in and was just amazed, because I wasn't expecting to be amazed. I thought it was going to be, light. This is my time to breathe easy and have some nice light New York comedy going, but just deep into the character detail, just the work she did with character and relationships. And I think, that what we don't know, we have an idea of, even the ones who have an idea of this, this artist here, Langston Hughes had plays on Broadway. So, that's a thing that maybe if you're paying attention, but there are communities behind the one play, there are communities behind it. So the plays that came out of the American Negro Theater, the writers that came out of that era, from that experience, the writers that came out of the Harlem Renaissance, the writers that came out of the 1900s and the Marshall Hotel and that first breath of Black theatrical community. There's just knowing that there are stories behind the stories you kind of vaguely know.
I love that so much. And, it's so interesting because I feel like in addition to, all the playwrights that we are mentioning, I think and really kind of touching on what Arminda is saying as well, the landscape of creation is really so exciting. I feel there's writers like Ola Rutimi, who I didn't know anything about, and who was kind of thinking about form and ceremony and ritual inside of theater in a really exciting way, and kind of embarked on a kind of theatrical experiment that it's something I'm excited to kind of dig into more. I'm so fascinated by folks like the composers like Will Marion Cook, and the ways that he was also thinking not only about the music that he was creating, but also how to create new platforms for other artists, and the work that he was doing in that regard. And Arminda, my brain, this extraordinary woman who was a part of the Federal Theater Project.
Rose McClendon?
Rose McClendon, like shapeshifters like Rose McClendon, who have had such an extraordinary part of our history. So it's really interesting, because I think part of our work in Classics too is thinking about the playwrights inside of the theatrical tradition, but also examining the largesse of the theatrical tradition that does not only exist inside of playwriting, that also exists in terms of other creators, in terms of other directors, composers, just artists who were compelled to create, producers, the people who were managing companies, the kind of complexity of all the people who were touching anything that related to kind of performative art. And so all of that to say, there's so many avenues to explore that are kind of unending.
And I know you have a lot of different things coming down the pike that all sound very exciting. And one of them, I believe, is a podcast. And I know that is one way that one platform you're using to highlight a lot of these incredible artists. Can you talk about if there's if it is still being worked out? We can sort of keep it vague, but what are the plans for that podcast, and how can people tune in?
Who wants to take that one? we've been deep in podcast research land. Well, I'll set it up and just say what the podcast is, and then I would love to. We've been having just these kind of great download sessions, but basically. The idea for the CLASSIX podcast is to cover and to examine different eras and different themes in Black theater history. So as of right now, we're thinking about exploring 5 different eras. And each era, which we call, each section, which we call an act, will have 4 episodes of history. It'll have an episode that features excerpts of a play that speak to that era, and it'll also feature an episode that's a talk back that really gives us the moment to kind of come together and talk about the era itself and also the era's legacy. So we are deep right now into research for the minstrelsy era, which is kicking us off. But I would love to toss it to Arminda or Brittany to tell a little bit more about what we're up to.
We're in the thick of it. We are. There's so much. It's funny because there's both a lot of research, as Arminda and AJ would attest, and also not a lot of research because some of these stories didn't get a chance to be written down, or that it's a secondhand account. And so it's a lot about not only compiling the information that we do have, but also trying to make sense of what could have been influencing these people and what their day-to-day lives would have been like. And that's been the most exciting part for me, is the conversations around who these artists were and who they might have been collaborating with and what they would have wanted and what their weaknesses might have been and where they might have felt like they failed or succeeded, and tying that into being an artist now and constantly being on that journey. I feel like we're not necessarily trying to give people answers and say, this is how you must think of this period, or this is what's valuable and this isn't, but we're trying to allow people to have even more questions and to form their own opinions and do their own deep dives and allow more excavation of all of these incredible moments.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say that one of the things that's been interesting, because we started researching this at this time, is the ability to research has been constrained a little bit. So there are books that I kind of see are out there, and sometimes we can get to them and sometimes we cannot get to them. So so there's been a lot of excavating that's just been, oh, but I can hit newspapers.com a lot and we can just follow. So I can follow this actor around the Midwest in a way that I would not have done if I had just been able to grab hold of this book. If I had been able to grab this book, it would have been easier, but it might have been shallower. I mean, sometimes I discover because I managed to grab hold of a book, or because AJ finds a book and I managed to see it. Trying to get you fired. But sometimes I discover, oh, there was an answer to that question that I've spent the last 12 hours trying to find through newspaper accounts and whatever. That answer was published in this time. Well, that's nice to know. But still, the process of finding it has been its own adventure, has been really, really satisfying. And some things I'm discovering are like, oh, this book said that, and it's kind of right, but it's not quite the story. That's not quite the way it was. And just being able to, okay, so that's kind of exciting, right? That's been exciting for me, because rabbit holes are my jam, and so this has been a really deep one. I will say, because probably the podcast will be coming out around the time that this comes out, or shortly after, or maybe a minute before. But in this area, that there are a lot of characters from this time that I didn't know very much, or teeny tiny bit about, that I have become completely invested in, and romantic rumors that I've become completely invested in and cannot find the truth of. So I mean, yeah, it's been special. to me. I hope we managed to convey some of that. And I have really burdened my cohorts with a lot of extraneous news, but they have been so tolerant, so patient. I really appreciated their forbearance on this.
It's like if someone says, we're going digging for gold. Do you want to come with us as we go digging for gold? Like that's the treasure trove that Arminda is constantly sharing with us. We're all just so happy to be on the adventure together.
Yeah. It reminds me of like when you are doing ancestry, especially as a Black person in the United States. It's very piecemeal, you know, like there are going to be census reports where names are probably misspelled and you're trying to figure out your own lineage. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of like looking at multiple resources and recognizing that some are just flat out wrong or slightly altered. But when you do get to the root of it, or think you do, it's the most rewarding thing in the world to be able to allow those people their true stories themselves as much as possible to really be given light.
I love that. So thinking about the podcast, thinking about sort of the future and what's to come, I'm curious, what are some of your hopes and dreams for CLASSIX as we, you know, hopefully move back into the theaters eventually, and also just sort of hopefully these plays become more and more a part of the public consciousness. How do you sort of see your work evolving through that process?
I can kick this one off, and I suppose the simplest thing to say is, you know, there's a writer who I love, whose name is Ben Okri, a novelist. And he talks a lot about, or every now and again in his dreams, he will just, in his work, he will just pepper in these kind of quotes and these thoughts about dreams. You know, he might say, you know, we can redream the world and make the dream real. And I'm just looking at it because it's hanging up on my wall. And I feel like for CLASSIX, it's partly to know the greatest part of the dream will be to know ourselves better, to know our history better, and also to kind of plant seeds so that everybody now and into the future can kind of examine the biggest possible dream for themselves just through knowing, which is a thing that there are so many places. And, you know, just as Arminda was saying, you know, I went through my entire kind of academic life, my entire college education, and only read one Black play. That's insane. It's like I want to know the greatness of the Black performance theatrical experience, and I want us all to be able to have the space to be able to know ourselves. So, in terms of CLASSIX specifically, I'll just outline too that we have 4 different kind of pillars that our work is falling inside of. It's readings, it's productions, it's education, it's narrative, it's publication, it's, you know, building the CLASSIX catalog, so that people can just have access as well. So it's a long and kind of winding answer, but it's to know. It's to know ourselves in the deepest, most truest way, and to dream for ourselves as well. But I would be excited to hear what the others have to say.
I think one thing we talked about when we first started gathering and just vibing off of one another was this. Right. I love it when Dominique can laugh silently. Anyway, when we were the sense that so much of the time we're reinventing the wheel. Like we have to just keep rediscovering that each generation doesn't have just access to its own history, that you just have to keep digging and digging to find what somebody else has already dug and dug to find, but you just don't know. So part of it is the access. The dream is to have the next generation that can just go, oh yeah, there. Oh yeah, that. Oh, I'm working with this, in the same way that you go, oh yeah, well, you know, this is kind of like Tennessee Williams. It's kind of like this. It's kind of, you know, to be able to go, well, you know, this is built on, you know, that this is, you know, kind of in this Philip Hayes Dean mode. This is about kind of in this, you know, this is kind of in this Childress mode. This is, you know, this is what, you know, all of these, you know, women writing these one-act plays that are, or this kind of experimental theater mode that goes back to Marita Bonner and through Adrienne Kennedy and through, at that point, somewhere in the future, Susan Laurie Parks, you know, that it's not just, oh, there's that person there and I don't know what was before that. It's just, yes, to just know, or to have it easy at your hands.
I completely agree with that. Just having the next generation not have to work as hard would be great. And I think, you know, I could probably spend my entire life excavating all of these moments and all of these Black artists and maybe get 10%, 15% of the way through. There are unending possibilities. And we joke all of the time about like, this is a mini series, this should be a movie, or we have to like publish these works that haven't been published before, or interview these people who weren't interviewed and make sure that their stories are told. So I think there's just so many opportunities to shed new light on it. And it's just, I don't even know the first place, but it's just, yeah, endless possibilities.
Well, I would also say too, in addition to what everyone else has said, is just more productions, more conversations about these artists and about their body of work, and because I mean, it shouldn't be. It should
a little bit. Oh, I think your line is cutting up a little bit. I think your line is cutting up a little bit for me. Oh yeah, that's much better.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, just to look at why is it so difficult to, you know, to find this work in general, and then also to look at how the institution has also done its part in suppressing this body of work and these artists, so that you know, it shouldn't. I think that it's been wonderful to, you know, to be able to go on this journey, but I think at the same time, these artists should be household names, and just, you know, the Black institutions have been producing these artists, you know, for decades. If you look at a Negro Ensemble company, you know, they produce hundreds of artists during their history. But how many of these artists then were able to find a home at other at predominantly white institutions outside of the Negro Ensemble companies and the new federal theater? So it just, you know, I also think that it should help us to, like, you know, reshape all of our lenses, so that it shouldn't have to be such a labor of love to find information that should be common knowledge.
And just because AJ's line was cutting up a bit, I just want to echo the thing that he was saying, which is that there are so many of these extraordinary playwrights who have been writing extraordinary plays, and there's incredible companies, including places like the Negro Ensemble Company, the Billie Holiday Theater, and numerous Black theater companies that have been committed to developing this work and keeping this work alive, and the kind of paucity of the echo of those writers inside of other institutions, inside of the white institutions, to be able to continue to elevate that work, including places that, as AJ mentioned earlier, have actually been a part of potentially the creation of some of those plays. So kind of creating a space and to kind of continue to hold institutions accountable to how they're telling the story of what the history of theater is.
Yeah, and I have two personal ones. The first one is, I would love for the future of CLASSIX to for the sort of social zeitgeist to find a way to make sure that like all of these Black playwrights who don't have estates have estates, and that like their families, that the estates they have set up are able to be paid so that they are able to continue, like these productions are able to happen and people are able to be properly compensated for it. And then I think the second one, and I have to quote Saidiya Hartman because that's all I know how to do. She asked this question in Scenes of Subjugation where she says, how is resistance registered in a context in which being found with a pen or pencil is almost as bad as having murdered your master? And I think about that question a lot, and I think about it a lot in theater, because I think that the sort of, if I'm able to have a secret goal inside of CLASSIX, it's actually to remind everyone that Black plays are dangerous. And they're not just dangerous because they make white people uncomfortable or because they make white people like have to confront some truth, right? They're actually dangerous because they have the possibility of reminding us of that our imaginations are powerful things, that we can imagine things outside of what have been given to us, that we can imagine ways outside of this country we find ourselves inside of. So for me, it's like we need to get back. I think about a lot about Angela Davis giving a speech from behind a bulletproof glass, right? What is so powerful in her words that you have to have her behind a bulletproof glass, right? The Black writing is dangerous. Black art is dangerous. And I want us to get it. I want us to remember that and to really lean into that danger.
I love that. Well, great. We will definitely have a link, first of all, to the CLASSIX website. We hope everyone watching goes to the website, checks out everything that is going on. And I just want to thank all of you so much for being here and for the great work you're all doing. I think this is work that requires all of us to be involved in, but all of your efforts has just been a real gift. So thank you for being here in community with us, and can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Scott.